Welcome back to the Tulsa World Sports Extra Show, OU edition. We made it to the first week of college football for the Oklahoma Sooners, and I promise you, it seems like we can never start the show without some breaking news happen. So, right before we began recording this show, it was announced that Demarco Murray would be suspended for one game for violating NCAA rules, which sounds like a little bit of tampering. Tram, can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like DeMarco was accused of impermissible phone calls and texts and contact. This is the age of that, right? With all the COVID situation, we've seen Iowa coach Kirk Ferentz suspended for this week's game against Illinois State for similar type things and recruiting of Cade McNamara, his quarterback, and it's embarrassing to OU because the Sooners have prided themselves, for the last 25 years on trying to do things by the book. And, OU's got sort of a shady history with NCAA probation and those things. And that's been put largely in the past. And then something like this happens. And, the detractors can say, same old OU. According to the press release, DeMarco said he wasn't aware that the rules had been reinstated after being suspended for a while, and OU was forced to come back and say, "No, we actually gave you the training and alerted all our coaches about what's going on." So, just sort of an embarrassment, I think, for the university, as well as sort of puts the program in a bad light, and that's the last thing Brent Venables wants.
I think it's doubly disappointing, Barry and Juwan, for a couple other reasons. I think DeMarco Murray is a big name on campus. He obviously, was one of the greatest running backs in Sooner history. He's still the program leader in touchdowns and yards from scrimmage. So he's a big representative of the university. If you even think about it from an NIL perspective, I believe, if I remember correctly, when OU launched its new collective, One Oklahoma, a couple months ago, one of the first promotional videos that they put out was featuring DeMarco Murray talking about everything that the university can do for a recruit. And so disappointing from that vantage point. Disappointing also because of the recent history with DeMarco Murray, in that Ohio State was interested in him this past offseason, was trying to draw him away from Norman, and OU actually gave him a 3-year extension and raise to keep him away from Ohio State and keep him here in Norman. And so the fact that a guy that you put a lot of faith and trust in by and a lot of confidence in by saying, "Hey, we want you here and we're going to up the ante for you to stay here," then he it turns out he's gone and done something like this. It's baffling. And couldn't agree more with Barry that it's disappointing from the perspective of how it looks for the university and how it represents OU.
Mason, do you feel like any immediate impact on this team will be had heading into this season opener game?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how that works, because like who's going to coach the running backs on game day, right? I'm sure maybe DeMarco Murray has some analysts or something that are helping him out, but he doesn't really have a pronounced assistant coach per se, compared to, say, James Skalski is the assistant linebackers coach for Zach Alley. That's his title, and that's what he does. So DeMarco, it was always said last year when they were going through this early season running back roulette and we couldn't figure out why they were switching around so many guys. It was always deferred to, hey, DeMarco makes the decision on the day of the game based on his feel from how the week of practice has gone. And so who's actually making the decisions, during the game about which running backs are getting on the field? That could potentially be a talking point as we head into Friday.
If there's one thing I know, it's they got enough coaches on campus to fill whatever duties uh, come up. The coaching staffs have exploded. Analysts can now coach. I think somebody can get Gavin Sawchuk and Javante Barnes lined up on Saturday against Temple. I think that's the least of their problems, I would say.
Friday against Temple.
Did I say Saturday?
Yeah,
Please,
it's okay.
got
It's
tickets. If
okay.
you've got tickets, go on Friday. The stadium will be largely empty on Saturday.
Well, let's get right into it, Tram. The Sooners open up their season Friday, 6 p.m. against the Temple Owls. 42.5 point favorites coming into this game, their first game in the SEC. Well, it's not an SEC game, but with the SEC logo on their jerseys. Tram, surprised by that 42.5 favorite for the OU Sooners?
No, Temple football is a little bit of a mess. 3 straight 3-9 seasons. Not a lot of great optimism about the 2024 year. Bunch of transfer portal guys at Temple. Nobody knows. That could be transforming for the program, or it could just be, lead to chaos. So no reason to think this is going to be a close game. 42-32, just pull a number out of your hat. OU is expected to be explosive offensively. We'll see about how efficient, but explosive with a lot of playmakers. So should be an overmatched game. Not very entertaining in terms of competitiveness. Not very revealing in terms of how this is going to set up for the SEC. But probably the kind of season opener that Brent Venables wants.
I think you also factor in that we really, as Barry said, there's so much mystery about Temple. They're not even going to name a starting quarterback. They got two guys that have completely different skill sets that they're trying to figure out what they have in those two. And I wouldn't be surprised against this OU defense if it's a real struggle bus for either or both of them, depending on how they decide to use them in the game. So yeah, that to me, that line is definitely appropriate. Just Temple's really not any good, and OU should handle business here.
Temple might not have named their starting quarterback, but we do see OU's depth chart heading into this game. Any surprises from your end, Mason, on who may get the start or who will get the start this Friday?
Yeah, I think the one that really popped out at people yesterday was Jaden Jackson, freshman defensive tackle, going to be a starter on the defensive line for OU in this game. We got some confirmation from OU historian Mike Brooks yesterday that he's going to be just the fourth ever freshman defensive tackle to start a game for OU, and the first since Tommy Harris all the way back in 2001. So going to be a really impressive feat for Jaden Jackson. And got to talk to him a little bit last night, and he said that he's really just not even satisfied with being a starter. He feels like the job's not necessarily one long term, and he's got to continue to push. But it is very impressive that he's gotten to this point already in his OU career. Brent Venables has been raving about him the past couple of days about how his skills were already really refined coming from a place like IMG Academy, where he was, a pretty elite prospect, a 4-star, and almost near a 5-star. And so, yeah, gonna be cool to see him make a little bit of history on Friday night, and we'll see where it goes from there.
The depth chart. Jackson clearly was the star of the depth chart. But the other thing that jumped out at me was the listing of Javonte Barnes as co-starter with Gavin Sawchuk at tailback. Sawchuk or Barnes. When last we saw these guys share the load on a legitimate basis was the Cheez-It Bowl against Florida State in December of 22, and they both went over 100 yards. Both looked like future stars. And then last year, Sawchuk sort of fulfilled that potential while Barnes suffered through a miserable year of injury and inactivity and just seemed like he could never get out of the starting gate. They've loved him in the offseason. They loved him in the August camp. Now he's a co-starter. I'm anxious to see how that plays out on Friday night against Temple and in the coming games. Is this going to be a shared duty as starting tailback with Javonte Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk?
Another piece for the offense that's really interesting is Brennan Thompson, listed as a co-starter with Nick Anderson at the receiver position. I think part of that is because, as Brent Venables has told us, that Nick Anderson could potentially get the start on Friday if Nick Anderson can't go. But it's really cool to see the development of Brennan Thompson. Obviously made history last year as one of the very few players that can say that they've been on the roster at both Texas and Oklahoma, transferring in from UT down in Austin. And he didn't have much of an impact last year. And I think part of that, as Brent Venables explained yesterday, was he didn't really play that much receiver in high school, actually. He was more of this just put the ball in his hands and see what happens. Played a lot of quarterback a lot of athlete per se. And so he's really had to learn the receiver position. And last year, in the few times that he did get in the games, he caught a couple deep passes, but that was because, the go route was really the only thing he had in his repertoire. So it sounds like that he's had a really good offseason in terms of being able to learn and run the entire route tree and really making himself a do-it-all receiver that can have a role in this OU offense.
Tram, I know you said earlier there isn't a lot that we probably can take from this game with projecting how OU season would turn out. I mean, especially with them being so heavy favorites. But who are some key players that you'll be watching for Friday in this first game?
Well, I think a guy we've been hearing a lot about since he landed in January, but projected to be a star is Deion Burks, transfer slot man from Purdue. Looks to be the guy that's going to be the electromagnetic player, the guy that sort of juices the OU offense, a guy that with big time speed coming out of the slot. That position has become a possession guy, a fail-safe guy, a safety valve. If you're in trouble, throw it to Drake Stoops. He's going to catch it and get 7 yards. So that was invaluable, but now you've added the element of a home run hitter with Deion Burks. I'm anxious to see how he's used and exactly what kind of player he's going to be. So, and clearly the offensive line, but Branson Hickman at center and the other transfer portal guys going to be littered throughout the offensive line. But heck, we don't know what we're watching when we watch the line. So I'm not going to really study the line. I'll let if you're brave enough to go ahead, but I'll have to let the coaches tell me exactly what happened there. But out in the open range, I'm going to be able to tell what kind of impact Deion Burks has.
I kind of want to see the guy that's actually probably going to be playing next to Jaden Jackson a lot on Friday night in Dominic Williams. Supposedly OU spent quite a bit of money to bring in this top defensive tackle transfer in the portal from TCU. And I want to see what kind of impact he can actually have on a game. He's listed as a co-starter with Dejon Terry, OU's returning super senior there. And they're definitely the two most experienced guys on the defensive line, have 1,000 snaps in their careers to this point. And so they'll rotate at the nose tackle position, but just curious, what Dominic Williams will actually look like in a Brent Venables defense and how the Brent Venables and Zach Alley might mix up the fronts, what things might actually look like there. And then the other thing for me is the kicking game, right? We saw in the depth chart that Tyler Keltner and Zach Smith are listed as co-starters, but Brent Venables says Tyler Keltner is going to get the field goal and extra point opportunities, and Zach Smith's got a really strong, but to this point, not super accurate leg. And so he's going to do the kickoffs. But Brent Venables said that Zach Smith, is continuing to develop. He had 90% made kicks in fall camp and just continues to, hang in there, even though it's been a rough couple seasons for him the past 2 years. So it'll be interesting if Keltner misses, from a decent range, do they immediately turn to Smith with the next opportunity? Brent Venables said that they might need both guys next year. Or this year. So how long is the leash? How big is the runway for these guys to get going? And then how do they adjust depending on the results?
If the Sooners end up needing to kick any field goals against Temple, that's regardless of whether they're made, that's not a good sign.
That's fair. That's fair.
Mason,
100% agree.
I want to ask you, because these are kind of been two talking points during the offseason heading into the season, with the health of the receiver position, and we're talking about their depth and the inconsistencies of the run game last year. Of those two position groups, who do you think is more important for themselves to prove themselves against Temple Friday?
Yeah, it probably is the run game. There's been all this offseason hype about Javonte Barnes, but you want to see it. You actually want to see it. And you want to also see if Gavin Sawchuk can continue the tear that he ended last season on. He had 100+ yards in the last 5 games of the season. So I definitely want to see those guys. Whereas, at receiver, there are more proven commodities. You know what you're going to get with Jalil Farouk. You know what you're going to get with Nick Anderson from last year, assuming he's healthy and he gets in the game. And we feel pretty good based on seeing the spring game, what we're going to get out of Deion Burks on these weekends this fall. So, Yeah, I would definitely go with the run game. Just wanted to see Gavin Sawchuk and Javante Barnes actually get out there and do it. But like Barry said, we saw a couple years ago in the Cheez-It Bowl, they both ran for over 100 yards, and we saw the 1-2 punch that they could be. And so, uh, hoping to see it again, start to come to life again Friday night.
This was a question that kind of popped into my head. I wanted to do a little deep research into it about how exactly do other people view Brent Venables? And when I was going through these different coaching listings from various sites, it seems like they had him around the 9 to 11 range, with the top end being Yahoo had him at 7. Compared to Steve Sarkisian, most sites had him as a top 3 coach in the SEC. One, do you think that's an appropriate range for Brent Venables to be 9 to 11? And will he have an opportunity to increase that ranking this year? Or do you think he will increase that ranking at the end of the year?
Well, when you look at this, here's the natural inclination. Oklahoma's got a football coach. Well, he ought to be near the top of any list just because he's coaching at Oklahoma. But two things. Venables is still a young head coach in terms of inexperienced head coach, just 2 seasons in. And he's now entering a league in which there's a lot of long-standing, successful coaches. Just making a quick list here. Kirby Smart, Kalen DeBoer, Steve Sarkisian, Brian Kelly. They've all been in college football playoffs. They've all proven their mettle. Then you got guys who have sort of really become really popular and transformative guys at their program. People like Josh Heupel and Mark Stoops. Lane Kiffin, despite the weirdness, has done an excellent job at Mississippi. Eli Drinkwitz has Missouri in the top 10, whether you think it's legit or not. He's done a really good job there. Mike Elko has won at Duke. So it's a difficult club to climb up the ladder in. And Brent, had a rough first year, had a comeback second year, but he's still pretty young in this endeavor as a head coach. So I don't see a problem with Brent Venables being labeled somewhere in the middle or even a little below the middle. He's certainly got the chance to climb up, and he's coaching at a place like Oklahoma, so nobody's going to and nobody should feel sorry for him. So I think it's the natural inclination is, hey, take umbrage that Brent Venables might be 11th out of 16 SEC coaches, but if you look at the entire totality of the landscape, that's probably not far off in terms of what he's accomplished so far.
I agree. I think it's completely fair given just the unprovenness to this point. I mean, you think about it, 6 and 7 in year one last year, vast improvement, but the commonality that still showed up even in 10 and 3 was what? They were unable to finish in 1-score games. That's been the thorn in their side this entire time under Brent Venables. And so is this the year that they finally put it to bed? Maybe. Barry, you had that great column a couple weeks ago about calling Brent Venables on his bluff, that he said it was the SEC's the 1-score league. It's actually not statistically, but there probably will be some 1-score games that they get into, and can they pull that off? I think is going to be Brent Venables' biggest opportunity to climb that ladder is right there in those 1-score games. The other thing I will say, I don't know about Steve Sarkisian at 3. I think he's a brilliant offensive coordinator, but I think also their defense, brother. Like it hasn't made it all the way for me yet. Obviously, even though they did make the playoff last year, so I'll just throw that out there as a little bonus.
The final thing before we move on into our kind of rapid fire segment, do you feel that Venables ends the season higher than 11th?
Oh, I'm actually pretty optimistic about the Sooners. So yeah, I think so. I think to start knocking near the top, he's going to have to, have a breakout year, big time year. But yeah, I think every successful Sooner season is going to raise him up the ladder. And Sarkisian a year ago would not have ranked. Did you say he's third? I think he wouldn't.
Yeah, that's about the average for him. About third.
He wouldn't rank third a year ago if you lumped in the SEC coaches. But you go to a playoff and people's perception changes. And, that I'm okay with that. He won the Big 12. Texas gets its first conference title in 14 years. You say, well, Texas ought to be winning. Yeah, but they haven't been, and now they have. So, you can make a lot of mileage, especially at a place like Oklahoma. Now, if Brent drops off a 3-5 in conference, that's not, he could drop down from 11. But I think in all likelihood he's going to climb that ladder, and after 3 years be in better shape status wise than he was after 2.
Not having seen these rankings that you're talking about and not knowing who's ahead of him, I can't say specific names, but I'm sure also that there will be some other coaches about whom there's a lot of hype who are ranked higher than Brent Venables on these lists that will fall short of expectations, and he'll just climb the ladder via that as well.
So I got some quick points that want to throw at you guys. I'm going to title this segment "Boomer or Bust," a little bit of fact or fiction. And I'll start with you, Mason. Heading into week 1, if at the end of the game Jackson Arnold doesn't throw an interception, fact or fiction? Temple's defense only picked off 3 passes of all last season.
Yeah, I think it'll be fact given what you just mentioned there, just how bad their defense is. And if it's not fact, there should be cause for concern, because if he's throwing interceptions against Temple, what is he going to do against real defenses in the SEC?
Tram, I'll throw that same question at you.
Yeah, you know what? I'll be disappointed if there's an interception. Interceptions are going to happen, even to the best of quarterbacks. They're going to happen. There's no reason for them to happen against Temple. Sooners are going to have them overmatched. If something happens and a ball gets tipped or something, what are you going to do? But I will be disappointed if there's an interception, because this is a game in which Jackson Arnold should have plenty of options for big plays and routine plays without taking any undue risks. So I will be very disappointed if there's a pick against Jackson Arnold on Friday night.
Tram, fact or fiction? Gavin Sawchuk rushes for over 130 yards Friday. He did 3 of his last 4 games last season.
I'm going to say I'm going to go bust on that one. I guess I should have went boomer on the first, but a bust on that one. I don't think he gets done in 30. I don't think you're going to see a big workload for any of the OU tailbacks. No reason to, if Barnes and Sawchuk are sort of sharing the load, and you've got some young guys that, Sam Franklin, the transfer from Tennessee Martin, Caleb Hicks, the recruit from last year. So a lot of guys in the mix. No reason to give anybody a heavy load. Now, I guess the best way for somebody to get a 130, Gavin Sawchuk, would be to break a long one, go 65, and then probably so. But in terms of a 19 for 152 game, I don't see it Friday night against Temple. I just don't know that anybody needs to get that heavy of a workload.
I agree with Barry, and I also think that part of it stems from, I would just presume that Temple is going to be so inadequate and unable to cover OU's receivers that we're going to see some deep shots, some quick scores from far, some long touchdown passes from Jackson Arnold, and they're not going to lean on the run as much in this game as they might otherwise in a different matchup.
Mason, boomer or bust? OU tops last year's opening point total of 73 points.
I'm going to go bust on that. That was a man. That was a lot of points, and yeah, I mean, Temple could be worse than Arkansas State. They probably are, but I just think, new quarterback, new offensive coordinator, feeling everything out the first game, and then also factor in that at some point they're gonna pull the main guys out and kind of probably take the edge off a little bit, and put some of the second and third string guys in. I don't know if they get all the way to 73, but I bet they could get into the 60s for sure.
I'm going to go bust just because we don't see it that often, right? We don't see 73 from anybody very much at all. They're certainly capable. I think it's going to be a one-sided affair, but I do think that Venables will get his guys out quick. I don't know that we need to see Jackson Arnold in the fourth quarter. I don't know that we'll see Michael Hawkins, period. He's the backup quarterback, but he may sit out some games for potential redshirt services. So I just think there's not any reason for the Sooners to desire or approach 70. I think the way it would happen is with some fluke plays, a punt return, a defensive touchdown or two, that kind of thing. And then, you score 21 points in 4 minutes after you've already got 42, all of a sudden all bets are off. But in terms of just lining up and bang, 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 go 7 plays, 80 yards for a touchdown, and then the next time go 75 yards in 4 plays, we're not going to see 10 of those kinds of touchdowns. So I think it's less likely. It's likely that it'll be less.
You mean we're not going to get the Gavin Freeman opening day special this year?
What we see out of him? The double reverse or the kinds of stuff.
Reverse 2 years ago, and then a punt return touchdown and another touchdown last year.
That's something to keep an eye on in Stillwater, though. Gavin Freeman in the season openers. Of course, he's doing it for the Cowboys now.
All right, let's get to our final segment of the show. Time for some predictions. May probably be the easiest time we do predictions throughout the whole season. But Tram, I'll start with you. Give me your prediction, win or loss, and the score.
I said 62-7. Sooners. The mystery will be, will the 62 be the result of 2 field goals or a missed extra point? Could have profound effect on the kicking game. Just how, not that you get to 62, but how you got there. So keep your eyes on the kickers in a 62-7 game.
I'm going to go 59-3. I just did that completely off the top of my head. I really didn't have a good preset idea about that, but I think that this defense might even be able to keep Temple out of the end zone, especially with their kind of dual quarterback thing going on and not knowing what that's going to be.
All right, that's it for this week's show. Again, OU opens up Friday against Temple at 6 p.m. We'll be back next week to recap everything that happened this past weekend. For myself, Juwan Lee, Tramel and Mason Young, this has been the OU Sports Extra Show, and we'll see you guys next week.